Chapter 1. The Wrong Street. Jun noticed the moon before he noticed the curb. It sat clean and milk-white above the small grocery's neon sign, so ordinary he didn't look twice until the light shifted, an underwater tint sliding across its face, like someone had dragged a blue filter over the sky. He blinked. The cart with his one paper bag creaked against his leg. Cars whispered by, a steady hush. The blue bled a little richer, the way a bruise blooms. He squinted, laughed under his breath at himself. Bad streetlight, camera glass in the phone tower, something. His head tipped back farther to check, gravity loosening his attention, and his sneaker toe brushed off the curb and into open air. He yanked his weight back too late. Tires screamed, a horn cut him in half, the paper bag kicked free, the new case skittering out like a fish. Light fractured, headlamps, that blue moon, a frost of sparks from somewhere, and sound vacuumed down to a thin wire. Ear pressure popped sharp enough to sting his jaw. For a heartbeat, he felt a breath of cold that wasn't air. The hairs on his arm stood up through his hoodie. Someone shouted his name, and he didn't know if it came from the sidewalk or from inside the ringing tunnel of his skull. Black slid in from the edges, not a curtain, but a tide. He reached for the case. The case wasn't there. The crosswalk paint swam sideways. The moon's blue doubled. He fell, and woke to stone under his shoulder blades. The stone was not sidewalk smooth. It had teeth. He found that out because when he tried to breathe, they pressed lines into his back through a shirt that wasn't his. His hoodie was gone. The world smelled wrong for a city night. No oil, no hot metal, no fried food, only lamp smoke and something green crushed and bitter. He kept his eyes closed because the absent hum of a refrigerator unit across the alley scared him more than sirens would have. Cold touched his face where air moved. Somewhere a bell hummed, low and not exactly on the hour, like a choir warming up. He cracked one eye. His sleeves were coarse, not knit. The shirt was a dark, thick weave like canvas, and it laced at the wrist with narrow cord. His other hand found a belt rope, not a buckle. The pants were rough, the seams hand-heavy. His sneakers were wrong too, gone. Soft boots hugged his ankles, tied with leather. He stared at the boots because they made no sense, and because he couldn't look up for a second without the ringing sliding sharp again. When he breathed, it tasted of ash and mint. No phone. "Hey," he said, voice low, to prove he was still here and sounding like himself. The word came out too loud in the lane. Somewhere to his right a door latch clicked. Footsteps approached, quick, then slowed. One shadow became two. The first was a woman, her hair wrapped up in a light scarf, her dress falling straight to the ankle in a dense fabric that didn't move like anything he owned. The second, a boy in a short coat cut close to the ribs, gloved fingers showing at the wrist. They didn't look like people in costume so much as people in someone else's century. But he'd seen professional reenactors before outside the museum. They'd looked real too until someone flashed a vape and the magician's trick folded. "Sir?" the woman ventured, careful. The boy's eyes flicked to June's hairline and away. He lifted his hand from the stones and pain tugged at his temple. Sorry." He swallowed. "Where's, the hospital? I think I—" He gestured vaguely at his head because the word for concussion slid away when he reached for it. "Hospital," the woman repeated, trying it on her tongue. Her eyebrows knit. "You are struck? Let me call someone." She glanced up the lane and lifted 2 fingers toward a window where a flicker moved. "Please," June said, and he realized suddenly he had absolutely no idea what the cross street was called around the grocery. Where is this?" "The lane," the boy said, as if that answered everything. He pointed. "The Healer House is not far?" Healer House. Jun thought of the greasy storefront on 9th with crystals and dry bundles hanging in the glass. He pictured a place like that and almost laughed because he was so glad to have a shape. "Okay, yeah, the healer, sure, thanks." "Can you stand?" the woman asked. He tested his weight. His legs held. A small thread of wet had made it to his jaw. When he wiped it with the heel of his hand, it came away pinkish and sticky. Not a dream then, unless dreams had upgraded. The ear pressure pinched again, like a plane descending too fast. It didn't match the altitude of any city he knew. He steadied his hand on the wall because the stones felt less likely to move than the sky. They walked. Not far, as promised. The lane opened onto a narrow street where lamplight pooled like coins. No bulbs, no fixtures, only flame in cages with wire so fine it made the light grainy. Footfalls clicked softer here, damped by old stone. The bell sound, whatever it was, deepened and rolled around the edges of the buildings, not precise like an app's alert, but alive and a little off. The healer house had no neon sign. It had a lintel rubbed dark with hands and a symbol scratched shallow above the threshold, 3 small lines inside a circle. Jun didn't know what that meant, but the woman ducked under it with the kind of ease that said the sign meant, "This is safe." He tried to take that like a life ring. Inside, the air was thick with green, bitter, and clean spice. Lamps put down warm bowls of light on a counter, a padded bench, a shelf of brown bottles with no labels. The healer was a man who looked older because his eyes were very steady, not from lines. He didn't say hello first. He looked at the blood, and then at Jun's pupils, and then at the way Jun sat, one hand keeping him steady on the bench. "Tell me," he said, voice mild. "What happened?" "Car," Jun said. "Road, His mouth worked once around the word that wanted to be blue, and he swallowed it because it felt too stupid to hand to a stranger. "Head. I don't remember after the light." The man's hands were clean. He tipped Jun's head gently, used cloths that smelled faintly of something mint and river-smooth stones warmed in a brass bowl. When he pressed one stone near the injury, a tingling went through Jun's scalp. Not pain, exactly. A fizzing release that made his eyes prick. Jun clung to the feeling of being touched carefully. It was one of the only real things. The bell hum from outside threaded the room. The flame of the nearest lamp fluttered without draft. For a second, the mesh of the lantern blurred, as if fog had breathed between it and the flame. Light pooled thicker, and then let go. Jun told himself it was his vision stuttering. "You have a crack?" the healer said after a minute. "Not deep, but you will be ill if you do not rest. You are pale. Do you have someone to bring you home?" "Yeah," Jun said automatically, and then realized he didn't. His phone. The sick little fall in his gut started to escalate. "I lost my bag. Do you have a phone? I can call." He mimed the rectangle, thumb to ear. "Phone?" The healer watched the mime the way one watches a child demonstrate a made-up game. "You may write a line for collection," he offered, which sounded like something between a receipt and a promise. "But first," he seemed to reach a decision. "The treatment. 2 small cups, finish now, and the poultice. Then coin." Coin, of course. Jun's hand went empty to a pocket with nothing. He opened his mouth, closed it, tried not to look at the woman who had brought him. He had not brought his wallet. And even if his wallet were here, his entire brain had no idea what money looked like in this place, because this place had healer houses and lamps with breath and a bell that didn't belong to any clock. "I can pay," he said, because the part of him that had been trained by counters and clerks before big tests spoke before panic did. "I just lost my—" He patted again, ridiculous. "I can come back. I can work, or—" He was talking too fast. He heard himself from the outside and hated the sound. "I can—" The healer lifted a hand, not unkindly. "Sit. The price is not cruel. If you do not have it, we will ask for surety. A name, a house, someone who will say you are not—" He hesitated for a word and chose very carefully. "Not a wanderer who disappears." "Wanderer." Jun laughed once, too short. "I'm not—" He stopped because he could not say the name of his street without logical collapse. He put both palms flat on his thighs to keep them from shaking. "I can pay tomorrow." The man waited 1 breath, 2. "What is your name?" he asked. "Jun," he said, because that at least he could supply. "Jun." He groped automatically for the rest, the small stack of identifiers. Address, phone, email, ID. When nothing arrived, sweat brought a chill up his back despite the warm room. The healer looked at the woman who'd brought him in. She lifted her shoulders apologetically and slipped toward the door as if to avoid being part of what came next. The healer's steady eyes did not change. "Without coin," he said at last, "I must ask for a witness, or call a door ward to carry you to a clerk who will write your name and hold you until someone answers it." Jun stared at him. "A door ward," he repeated softly, tasting the wrongness. He pictured a security guard, a hospital billing office, someone sliding a clipboard over a desk. The bell outside landed on a note and held it too long, buzzing the inside of his teeth. The flame's mesh blurred again, then cleared. The stone under his palm was very warm now, and he realized absently that the brass bowl's heat had bled into the table. "I didn't mean to," he said, because he needed to speak, even if he could not make sense. "I'm not trying to steal care. I can't—" He forced breath in through his nose. It trembled going out. "I can't find my phone." "I do not know your words," the healer said gently, "but I know the look of someone struck by the world. The door ward will not be cruel. He will walk beside you. You may tell your name to the clerk, and perhaps the clerk will find someone who knows it." He paused, small kindness brightening his voice, as if he thought this would help. "You are not the first to come here confused." "Confused? Yes. That was the word that did not feel like failure?" Jun worked his jaw until it loosened enough to let him nod. "Okay," he said, because he didn't see a better choice. "Okay." The healer lifted the latch on the inner door and called something into the hall beyond. Jun's stomach pulled. His hands wanted to clench and fight, which was ridiculous and useless. He told himself not to be an a-hole. He told himself to be a person who cooperated with the nice man who had warmed stones to the exact temperature of a palm. He told himself he would get to the clerk, borrow a phone, get a ride. He would laugh. Maybe later, maybe a little. Even the blue moon would be obvious in hindsight. He clung to this provisional story so hard his fingers hurt. 2 door wards came in, not in uniforms exactly, but in plain coats with a narrow, neat badge stitched near the collar. He tried not to look at the badge because the symbol meant nothing, and looking too hard at symbols right now felt like letting them into his head to rearrange furniture. They were careful with him, not grabbing, just standing near enough to make a direction with their bodies when they gestured. He stood because 2 different people in the room wanted him to stand, and this, here, now, seemed like the least bad thing. "Why?" he asked one of the coats, because the rules in his head demanded it. Why do I have to go?" The nearer one, a broad-shouldered person with hair bound at the nape, answered plainly. "Healers ask us when there is payment trouble," they said. "It keeps the ledger clean. The clerk will hear and set you right if there is no fault." Ledger. Clerk. He could live inside those words long enough to get outside this room. He nodded, once. He let them flank him. He watched the door on the way out to make sure it stayed open, because watching exits was instinct, and because knowing they weren't doing anything to hide him let him pretend to himself that he'd chosen this. Outside the street was brighter, for no reason Jun understood. The blue on the moon was gone now, or thinned so much his eye couldn't hold it. The bell cadence picked up, then stalled, as if someone had bumped the timing. They walked not fast, but steady. Jun kept pace because he didn't have any other plan as long as the world felt made out of wrong fabric. He counted steps until that turned into a way to be sick more slowly. He asked the second coat a question he knew was stupid, and asked it anyway. "How far is the clock?" "Not far," the second one promised, and pointed at the end of the street where a wider space opened with a line of doors under a shallow overhang. People moved that way. A stream, quiet, organized, and nothing like any hospital queue he'd seen. No smartphones. He looked for cameras and saw none, which didn't make sense if this was a film set. Maybe the cameras were tiny, invisible in the lamps. The thought made him want to laugh and throw up at once. When they reached the turning before the overhang, Jun tested his luck. He stopped walking. Both coats stopped too. They did not touch him. He looked past them, down the side street that slit off the square like a crack. He measured the length of it with his eyes the way you do when you're late to class and you're wondering if you can cut a corner. He turned his head toward the nearer coat. "If I go there..." He kept his voice low. "Is that allowed?" "Allowed," the nearer one said, not unkindly. "But we will follow." "Right," he swallowed. "And at the clerk I can write my name, yes?" "And if no one knows it," he said, because somehow asking the worst thing aloud made it smaller, "what then?" "Then we keep you," the nearer one said, and the honesty in that sent cold down Jun's spine. "Until someone does." The bell rolled again, a soft mistake in its middle, like a breath taken too late. The light from the lamps thickened against the green in the air. That ear pressure returned, a squeeze that made everything just a little too loud. Jun's heart scraped raw inside his ribs, stupidly. He made himself nod, as if the thought of being kept were a temp job at the worst office and not a trap. "Okay," he said. "Okay, He made himself smile. "I'm just going to..." He pointed at the side street. I need a second. The nearer coat's mouth tightened. They looked to their credit at the open square, at the people moving not far away, at the healer's house still within shout distance. A short one, they said. June turned his head as if to spit over his shoulder, a stupid habit of boys behind stadiums. The second coat's attention flicked there too, companion reflex. Jun went the wrong way. He ran. Not like a sprinter. He didn't have that kind of gas in his tank. He ran like a boy who'd tripped in a parking lot once and remembered how to move before he hit concrete. He slid between a man shouldering a crate and a girl carrying a coil of rope, said, "Sorry," without breath, and meant it. Shouts followed him. His name? Not his name. He didn't listen. He didn't look back because looking back wastes forward. Footsteps behind, not pounding straight at him, but not losing him either. He cut left into a narrower cut of street because sharp angles multiplied chances. The walls here wore old stains. Windows were narrow, shutters latched with iron. The smell changed. Bread somewhere, the sharp drag of dye, a faint whiff of wet metal. He burst into a market not like the markets he knew, but some ancestor of them. A long seam of stalls under stretched canvas, ropes and pulleys holding shade, counters layered with cloth and glass, and bowls of something that steamed pale. Jun's brain tried to make it a Renaissance fair and failed. The people were wrong for that. Too many of them moved like they had always carried their bodies in this place. The bell streaked through the air again. Someone laughed near it like they'd expected the offbeat. Jun cut between a rack of hanging spoons and a pile of lamps, one elbow grazing metal. A wall of voices lifted. Bargain, complaint, greeting in syllables that refused to set. "Sorry," he said again, and then he slammed into someone he hadn't seen. They hit each other hard enough to tangle. The stranger's shoulder caught June under the breastbone. Jun's hip bit the edge of a low bench, and his legs went out. They went down together in the narrow between stalls, and gravity put the other man on top of him, chest to chest, breath stealing breath. Jun's head flared, a pulse of white behind his eyes. He would have sworn the lamp 2 stalls over flared too, the mesh blurred, light pooling thick as if the world breathed out and forgot to breathe in. Ear pressure knifed hot, popped, and left a ringing sweet as fever. The stones under him thrummed once. All of that happened in the slice of time it took for their faces to end up very close. The stranger was June's age, maybe, or a little younger. Close-cut hair, except the front had grown long and fell in a line that would have brushed his cheek if it hadn't been pushed back. His clothes were not like the coats and woven sleeves June had seen so far. They were lighter, layered, with stitching that reminded June of a casual jacket more than anything formal, but the cut was still wrong for the store he'd left. Dark eyes, narrow, a mouth that had already drawn to a line of caution before the collision made it a sharper mark. Their noses nearly touched. They both froze because having a stranger's breath on your lip does that to you, even if your head isn't cracked. June's hands had gone up when he fell. One had landed instinctively in the space between the other man's shoulders. Warmth shocked through his palm like static jumping a winter door handle. He tightened without meaning to, half pain, half the panic of holding on to make the spin stop. "Hi," June said, because his brain, when overwhelmed, sometimes threw him into the deep pool of ridiculous. "Sorry, I didn't see you." The stranger's expression flickered. Surprise, a breath, a reflex to get off. "You should look," he said, careful, as if his words were something he'd learned to fit and might chip if he wasn't precise. He pushed himself up on one hand. He did it slow, not from weakness, but from the kind of deliberate caution that told June the man had learned the hard way not to make sudden moves in crowds. June felt a shimmer under his palm as the stranger shifted. It went through tendon and into bone. He pulled his hand back so fast he almost smacked himself in the face. The light 2 stalls over steadied. He told himself none of that had happened and focused on practical. "Are you okay?" John asked. "I wasn't watching and—" He gestured to his temple, which decided this was a perfect time to remind him of the wound by throbbing hard enough to blur things. He swallowed. The stranger, now crouched over him, looked him up and down in a sweep that was not intimate but efficient, hands, knees, the way June's pupils took light. Caution lingered more than irritation. "You are struck," he said, not a question. "Yeah." June almost laughed and aborted it because it hurt. "I'm fine, mostly. Did I hurt you?" He reached for vocabulary and fell on something simple because simple felt safer. "Sorry." The stranger shook his head once. His gaze cut sideways, fast. If Jun hadn't been underneath him, he might have missed it. He followed the glance without turning his head and caught a slip of plain coat at the edge of the market, moving the way predators move when they want you to forget they are there. "Is someone following you?" the stranger asked, as if it were the kind of question you could ask a stranger without opening an entire city of explanations. "No," Jun lied automatically, and then made a face because, even if he wanted to lie better, his face wasn't built for it when he was dizzy. Kind of. Maybe. He pushed his hands under him, and the world wobbled. He got one foot flat on the stones. "I just need to..." He gestured vaguely toward the far side of the market, toward air, toward some place that had phones and coffee, and his name on a list that proved he existed. The stranger's body tipped infinitesimally, an instinct to help that he checked mid-sternum. Caution closed back over whatever had flared at the first jolt. He slid one palm out to give Jun space, which meant he was now a silhouette against the lamp 2 stalls over. The mesh shimmered again, heavy honey light and stilled. Jun's hairline throbbed. He wanted to lie down and he wanted to run, and both wants were stupid. He made the kind of decision you make when you are in a panic and must pretend not to be. He pretended he had control. He reached up, his fingers brushing the stranger's sleeve for balance as he got his feet under him. Warmth jumped again. Brief. A skip in a heartbeat. The stranger's eyes widened by a hair. Jun let go like he'd touched a live wire. "Sorry," he said again, too many apologies stacked. "I didn't mean to..." He realized he'd said that to the healer too. He was saying that to everyone. He hated that. "I have to go." "Down the far lane," the stranger said, the words measured, not advice so much as a mapping of terrain. "If you want not to be seen." Jun blinked because that implied he'd been seen by someone who meant him trouble, and also implied the stranger wasn't going to hold him, question him, or announce him. "Thanks," he said, and meant it with a heat he tried not to put into his voice. He hesitated because something in the stranger's face felt like gravity again. Familiar, unfamiliarly. That made no sense. He moved. He had room for 3 strides before the coats noticed he had cut direction and reoriented. If he'd been perfectly healthy and in a space he knew, maybe he could have threaded the stalls again and slipped. As it was, his shin barked off a low bar that shouldn't have been there, and the little stumble cut the edge off the advantage the stranger had given him. He didn't look back because the stranger had done him a kindness, and the only way to keep it a kindness was to not drag the man into it by sharing his face with a chase. Down the lane. Canvas flapped above him. A rope creaked. The bell struck and missed again. Once, twice, as if the world's timing had picked up a hitch since his head hit stone. He took the right at a water barrel, the left at a stall selling bundles of dried green. His breath came sideways. He could feel it catching in the back of his throat like he'd run too hard on a cold day in school. He tasted blood again. The edges of his sight salted with static, black and white, like an old TV trying to find a channel. Hands reached, not for him, but to lift baskets out of his way as he clipped a corner too tight and nearly sent fruit into the street. He said nothing now. Breath was currency and he spent it on his legs. The coat's footfalls didn't get louder, but they didn't fade. He had the uncharitable thought that they were professionals at this exact distance of keeping close enough to be known and far enough not to provoke. The thought might have been generous too. He couldn't tell. The lane narrowed again and then spat him into a square where 3 streets met. He chose the one with fewer lamps because fewer lamps meant fewer people. The fewer lamps also meant the stones were uneven, and his boot, the boot that wasn't his, caught on a rise. He moved loose. Pain lanced his temple, bright enough to tear the last layer of stubborn off him. He put one hand out to the wall to steady himself. The stone under his palm thrummed again, faint and deep. He told himself it was his pulse. He told himself the little flicker under the skin of the light nearby was an eyelid and not a sign. The air went thin. He tried to pull a breath through a straw. The coat said nothing behind him, and that somehow did more to unravel him than if they'd shouted. He pushed off the wall because stopping would be worse, because if he could make it one more turn, a door, a corner, the world swayed. He could not correct it quick enough. He got 3 more steps, maybe 2. He saw, briefly and with perfect clarity, the stranger back in the market, the angle of the jaw, the way his hand had flinched and steadied, the flick of his eyes to the coats. He thought, stupidly and fiercely, Thank you. He thought of the blue that had slid over the moon like a bruise choosing a face. He thought of his name, small and stubborn. The ground rushed up, not fast. It was more the way a tired person leans toward bed when he's been standing too long. The bell in the distance missed its mark one last time, and light pooled thick and honey-slow in the corner of his eye. His knee buckled, then his shoulder. The stones were not kind. The ground rushed up, not fast, more like a tired man leaning toward a bed he'd already chosen. The bell missed its mark again. Light thickened at the edge of his vision, warm and syrup-slow. His knee folded, his shoulder kissed stone, and the world slid its dimmer down.